Yeah, hi, this is Mark Caraway with BlockApps in our finance team. And so I'll be talking about the regulatory landscape for financial services today.
And hi, everyone. My name is Craig Recatto, and I'll be taking you on a journey through the regulatory maze that is healthcare in the United States and in the world, actually.
Okay, great. And we also have with us Dennis and Samson from the AI and RPA and QC Meetup group. And so we welcome everyone from the Meetup group who's joining us today. We love the stuff that you guys discuss together, and we hope that you find this useful. Please don't hesitate to interject and ask questions with the Q&A. We will try and make this engaging and interactive as we go through. So let's go ahead and get started.
Awesome. So first we'll talk about today is the regulatory impact around finance, specifically relating to blockchain. And so if we go to the next slide, what we'll overview today is just a general overview of blockchain for finance and really how we can need to adapt to changing regulatory and customer needs leveraging blockchain. And so the next slide here, we'll talk through a little bit over specific, what is kind of major finance industry trends. So generally the industry is always going to be focused on how do we increase protection and value for our customers while lowering our risk and lowering cost of doing business. Of course, 2020 has brought unique challenges, including how do we achieve our same goals while going digital as velocity continues to increase. And today we'll talk through blockchain and some of the questions that the industry is considering. How do we keep these same protections that we've built over 100 years for our customers while operating and participating in distributed financial networks? Next slide, please. So this is just kind of where our opinion of where blockchain is in the industry. Financial services was one of the first industries to adopt blockchain, certainly with Bitcoin. The need was identified. I think efficiencies were created, and we're just getting to that point where there's really full commercialization, which includes supporting services, supporting delivery models and technologies around blockchain and financial services. And also clear regulatory buy-in. I think depending on the country where you reside, regulatory buy-in or support of blockchain may be less or more clear. And I think financial services is probably one of the key industries where regulators are taking a hard look because of the nature of digital assets and money movement and central banking. But we'll also start to see collaboration more across industry and across borders. And mass scale efficiency. Next slide, please. And so generally, where are financial firms using blockchain? We see this in three key areas. Adding functionality to banking networks currently is very difficult due to antiquated architectures, requires a lot of coordination. So we're seeing distributed ledgers being created to allow for much faster pace of innovation. Second, financial firms hold entire risk of market segments and are typically, centralized ownership with few marketplace options. So we're seeing financial firms de-risk in certain areas, but focusing on the largest value and allowing participants to define and dictate the marketplace while the participants are owning more of the risk. And certainly, lastly, banking and financial firms maintain redundant, non-standard systems. So they're looking to just lower business costs by standardizing and consolidating into a logical system. Next slide, please. And again, feel free to stop us anytime and ask questions in the Q&A. We're happy to chat about anything that you may want to talk more about. First, we'll talk about increasing distribution. Initially, financial firms would hold the entire risk of a market segment. So the entire liquidity risk, market risk, asset risk. Any type of risk was typically held on the balance sheet of a bank and backed by central banks. And so by increasing distribution, these companies are able to de-risk and capture the highest value. So they're still facilitating the market, but they can put a little bit more of the risk and the ownership on the participants, instead of the bank having to prove the entire chain. Next slide, please. We'll talk more about this as well for a couple of situations, but again, financial firms are maintaining redundant systems. This is both an internal issue, but certainly an external issue. Financial services, like healthcare, is an industry where competitors are needing to collaborate, and so creating regulation around moving from redundancies with reconciliations teams to a logical system, I think is something that lawmakers are looking at. Is how do we regulate a system where there's multiple processes, multiple parties involved, but they're all sharing the same network architecture. Next slide, please. And lastly, I think this is very important for the industry, is how do we create a technology architecture and infrastructure with capabilities to innovate quickly. The pace of innovation is picking up around financial services. We've seen it with the fintech boom. We've seen it with innovations in certain areas, and firms need to have systems in place to innovate and adapt quickly as market needs are changing and as regulations are changing. Next slide, please. So we'll talk through some of the evolving industry requirements in 4 key areas. And so the first area that we'll talk through here is multi-party lending. Next slide, please.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Yes.
Hi, this is Samson here. Sorry to interject, but before you move on, I'm kind of more interested if you can elaborate on saving costs of business. I think as a finance person myself, that's kind of something that people are more focused on, or maybe would be more attracted to. Like, are you able to elaborate maybe from your slide earlier, maybe some examples, or just a bit more elaboration on where that can be money savings overall?
Yes, absolutely. And there will be a couple of slides that showcase this, but I would say the business model, for financial firms is, like many other firms, selling products, right? And the products happen to be financial products. And the cost of selling those products is, you can't really limit the sales process around those products. But the major cost, and it's growing, is really around compliance and audit. Recent studies showed that firms are spending up to 10% of revenue on compliance. And so when you think about compliance, there's not really a profit center, right? There's no money to be made from having the best compliance department, but it is a necessary part of doing business. And so what blockchain enables is to take some of the weight off of compliance. The biggest things dragging compliance down are just being able to find the data. A lot of times your audit and compliance teams are having to knock on doors of the business folks, and it takes time to get that information. And it's not that they don't want to share it, it's just not what their day job is. And so having to collaborate and pull data from the business units can take time and cost a lot of money. And so through a system that's set up on one single logical system on a blockchain network, you can actually continue doing business the way you've been doing it, and you can set up rules and procedures to have the right data shared amongst the right parties. So you don't need to disrupt your main revenue driving business with your audit and compliance. But I would just say the other piece, and we'll talk about it here and really throughout the presentation on finance, is just reconciliation. I think especially with financial products, you've got money moving around, and every party needs to reconcile their accounts. And so there's a lot of time spent on, facilitating the execution of a trade, like we're talking about here in trade finance, but then you actually have to settle the trade, reconcile the accounts. So there's a lot of time just spent verifying that something has or hasn't happened. And so those are some of the ways that, blockchain will lower the cost of business, is removing a lot of the extra steps involved, but also improving the speed of the way business is done. So with the same workforce size, without limiting your workforce, you can actually produce more value in the same amount of time. And so, one example is multi-party lending. When you think about trade finance, syndicated or collateralized debt, there can be a lot of disagreement, or again, time that it takes to agree on what the product, is. Has it been shipped? When it was shipped? There may be multiple regulations from across borders, multiple policies, multiple currencies. So you're, in essence, in any kind of multi-party lending, you're always reconciling. And this is one of the biggest reasons that small and medium-sized businesses aren't as active in trade finance, is the cost of these types of lending is very high due to the high need of reconciliation. The other thing for financial institutions is the risk is higher, because even when you're getting data, you don't know where the source of that data came from. You don't know how that data was presented and who's been manipulating the data from the time you've seen it to now. So, there's a little bit of a lack of trust with the added impact of layers, right? So you may be getting information from your partner's vendor, or even farther down the chain. So there's just this large network of data, and you don't know what is true. So with the programmatic process, we're creating a system-based translation. So the system is set up to translate not only currencies, but different policies, different regulations. It's set up to be that source of truth around what was actually done to the product. Was there an issue done on the creation, or was it on the shipment? Where is the product at the moment? And making sure we can tie triggers, payment triggers, to those physical location or other details. And again, we're letting each company still abide by their own regulations, and the blockchain system is just translating that for the intercompany collaboration. It's lowering the risk. Greater visibility is the best way to lower risk for the financial institutions, when they have a better understanding of all the participants, and they can verify a little bit more of data. Obviously, you can't inhibit somebody from falsifying information throughout the chain, but you can see who entered that information, and if there's a participant that you can't trust, you can quickly remove just that individual or that entity. But you can also get a little bit more visibility on how they found their data, or what is their audit process around the data, and just lowering the cost with faster onboarding and evaluation process. And again, feel free, anyone, to stop me if you have questions about this, but if not, we can go to the next slide. Next slide, Craig.
Wrong one. Yeah, hold on.
So a great example is energy trading. Energy is one of those things that is it's very difficult to work with. And so a lot of times there is a disagreement on what is actually happening. And so you've got traders on one end who are actually executing the trades. Then you have the whole team that needs to settle and verify that the energy was moved to the right parties. And so again, there's a very complex process, and through a lot of times no fault of anyone in the procedure, there's just a disagreement of what happened and when, because you've got energy that may not be moving in the way that you like. And so with a blockchain system, you can have that real-time single source of truth for all trade activity, and actually reconcile the trade once everything has been approved in real time as well. So this is a product that we're very excited about. It just shows the capacity and capabilities around this type of financing and trading. Next slide, please. Another thing that distribution can add is new market participants. I think there's a lot of stats out there around $300 billion of untapped assets for the underbanked, but there's also, a lot of small and medium-sized investors and businesses who are banked who are looking to get in other alternative assets. But the alternative asset market tends to be highly illiquid and can either be, very very tough for the buyer or the seller, depending on the supplier demand. And so biggest issue is the cost, inhibiting these businesses and the underbanked to get involved. Alternative assets generally require high touch relative to value. A lot of proof, registration, and restrictions may be involved. So you can still have these procedures in place, but you can, programmatically, make the system, be the source of truth around the information for the alternative assets. And I think for regulators, this is a key area because they spend a lot of time focusing on the assets that they're familiar with, stock, bonds, et cetera. Alternative assets do require a little bit more oversight, but you can program that in, and so you don't need to necessarily, create the burden. And for the unbanked, the access to the marketplace is very limited, and the types of product is limited. So by distributing, we have a lower cost and easier level of access. Next slide, please. So this is a great example of this. You can actually sign up today. We've got a customer of ours who built a real estate platform on our product for small scale investors. So typically only 15% of the US market is eligible to invest in real estate. Even today you can sign up and invest in a real estate property for $20 on our platform. So this is a very revolutionary product here, and I think it just shows the ability not only to fractionalize ownership for additional investors, but also how you can create illiquid assets and create liquidity around them while still complying with the set of requirements and regulations involved. Next slide, please. So the challenges with the current ERPs and core banking systems are, again, slow reconciliation. There's a lot of duplicate and fragmented data and security. It's very tough for financial firms to actually get active liquidity and cash metrics because their systems are moving slower than the business. So by the time the system has understood current cash and liquidity metrics, the business is moving faster. And so there's a number of teams actively trying to understand liquidity and market risk for firms on a daily basis. But this could be done through programmatic reconciliation. So automated reporting, reconciliation upon triggers with a single logical standardized system. Firms also have the issue of various customer profiles. And this obviously comes up with AML, KYC, other types of issues around the customer, but also for business customers. And so this is something regulators are taking a very close look at, is how do we truly understand who our business and retail customers are. And because of this fragmentation, there's no holistic view of company risk. And lastly, there's many points of entry for failure. But with the blockchain-based system, privacy and security limits the risk to really the user level and the individual participant level, while also providing the greater transparency and visibility into the chain of data. So it's much easier to connect disparate and fragmented systems. Next slide, please. So one example of this is DMV database. DMVs are notoriously antiquated architecture, and even internally within their own systems, it's tough to communicate within the same state. It's almost impossible to communicate across state borders. And if another legislative or law enforcement body needs to utilize these records, it's very difficult to pull out the information in a timely manner. So we've created a highly interoperable system that can still keep and hold the rules of the DMV, but allow for other participants to be involved and share information. Next slide, please. One other example for this is our work with BHP Billiton. They're tracking minerals globally, and using a single logical system, they could actually provide better insights for their vendors on where the product is, and also regulators who may need to have an understanding of what actually happened to certain types of products that they're digging out of the ground. So a much better way to share information real time without having to add the cost of manual data movement. Next slide, please. And so this is the last piece for finance, and I think probably the most important. Thomson Reuters survey of compliance officers found the number one thing they were concerned with is the changing regulatory environment, right? It's, you know, every time they've learned a new regulation, another one is coming in the next 2 years, and you've got to have, you know, your processes and systems in place. And so with, you know, current systems, it's very hard to adopt and institute new processes, especially at the pace the regulators are trying to keep up with the industry, and the pace that regulation, you know, it will be changing, will be difficult to keep up with. The other issue with compliance and audit is various systems are giving different pictures with no single source of truth. And it's a very high effort and costly effort to capture data and report on what you're actually doing or haven't done. With the blockchain network, as you can see here, you can upgrade quickly. You know, you can have one party upgrade the system, the rest of the network receives the upgrade. So you can actually have all parties working on upgrades at the same time, just different upgrades. So the pace of innovation and upgrade can happen exponentially here. The logical system utilizing smart contracts and APIs not only allow just data to be upgraded, but also entire business processes to be programmed and upgraded in a much quicker fashion. The logical system can make complex decisions easily across all parties, and there's a low manual effort around data capture and reporting. And so, again, given the, you know, compliance, you know, main concern is really the speed of change of regulation and making sure they're involved. This is a key way to make sure that that's being taken care of. And next slide, please. So this is one example of you know, regulatory reporting and the impact. Greater Greener Buildings Act of New York City requires all buildings to be carbon neutral as soon as 2025. So really all buildings are needing to upgrade their compliance and reporting metrics around CO2 emissions. And again, this is not a profit center. This is, you know, something required. And you know, there's a lot of ways to go about this, but instead of having to set up a whole team to, you know, monitor and manage the data, this can be done programmatically. So we can, you know, again, standardize and simplify the compliance reporting procedures and make it easier for firms to be eligible for incentives by, you know, hitting or overachieving certain metrics.
Hey, Mark, I
Yes.
actually forgot to ask a question earlier that this reminded me of. I know ultimately one of the ideas of this project is to, you know, tokenize the CO2 reduction and have that be a sort of asset that can be exchanged. Before, when you were talking about like alternative assets and introducing those kind of assets into the market, is this the type of asset that would be, or is it more a different type of insurance product?
No, this is definitely an example of an alternative asset, right? I think, you know, an asset can be anything that, you know, there's a market for, right? And so this type of, you know, tokenization is, you know, what they're actually doing with the real estate as well. So, you know, through tokenization, you can, you know, create assets for almost anything. You know, we've done this here, you know, creating this marketplace. You can do that with loyalty points. I think with insurance firms, they're actually creating new products, you know, tokenizing insurance around specific events, but also being able to have, you know, more of a group and a collaborative insurance product. So, you know, this is, yeah, one great example of alternative assets, but we're seeing this not only for businesses who are looking for other ways to invest in pieces of their supply chain that they may normally not invest in, whether that's the original producer of certain assets that are important to them, or other areas that may offset certain risks, the same way that financial firms will invest in swaps and derivatives. You can see other businesses that will invest in other areas, through tokenized assets. And again, creating liquidity through tokenization and the simplified process of trading.
Thanks for clarifying.
And I see a question to comment on the status of the Ricardian contracts. I'm not familiar with Ricardian contracts, but I'll definitely send some info back out. I know we'll send an email out afterwards, and we'll get some notes around Ricardian contracts and DLT. But I think the other piece of the question is important. Do you see them as gaining traction as legally binding instruments? This is one area where regulators are still working, and we haven't gotten clear guidance. Even in real estate, we're working with a number of firms who are concerned that has there been clear guidance that says blockchain transaction of ownership is admissible in court? And so this is one key area to watch out for financial regulations, is just getting that thumbs up that we're separating blockchain as a technology from Bitcoin and currencies. And so, blockchain should be treated like any other database, right? If there's a data record that could be admissible in court on, an Excel spreadsheet, it certainly should be admissible through blockchain. But because there hasn't been a clear statement on this, I think there's a number of firms who are waiting until the legal implications are getting cleared up in certain areas before you start seeing a lot larger investments. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. You've got my email here. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions or just want to chat about the financial services market for blockchain. And now I'll turn it over to Craig, who will walk you through the current regulatory environment for healthcare.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark, and thanks again, Caleb. Let's see here. I'll go to this slide, and again, after the presentation, we'll send everyone an email with our contact information, and it is in the slides here if you have any questions later. As Mark had said, my name is Craig, and I will start it out with the DSCSA serialization and track and trace requirements. Seems to be somewhat of a pain point in the pharmaceutical industry right now, with the serialization requirement going into full force in 2023, actually, November 27th. What I've done here is, in this presentation, you'll see some of my slides. I'll have the relevant law and some goals of the legislation just to familiarize everyone, and then see what's transpired since then. So in this case, it was part of the 2013 Drug Quality and Security Act. And so the DSCSA was part of the DQSA, which a lot of this was surrounding an incident that happened at a compounding pharmacy that was acting as a manufacturer. But the law does require the pharmaceutical industry to build an electronic interoperable system, and right in the regulations, identify, serialize, track and trace prescription drugs in the pharmaceutical supply chain. So the goal of it was to allow greater trust and transparency. It really just one of the other things was to say, hey, we're going to have to standardize the data exchange, because everyone has their own legacy system and their own proprietary system. And even right now in the industry, people are still struggling a little with that, but we've made a lot of leeway over the past year and a half. And also coming up with the unique identifiers. So you're gonna have to serialize everything, the minimum, the smallest saleable unit, up to the the largest case or pack that you sell. So coming up with that unique identifier that you have to keep active for 6 years, it made people have to think quite a bit. Some of the challenges with the current methodologies is actually serialization protocol. Too many connections. I have a small graphic here, and you look there, and it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, or 6 entities, I should say. And that's about the minimum that you'll ever see in a supply chain. You know, if it just went bounce between each one of these entities. But in reality, you know, the manufacturer sends it to a repackager, that sends it to a primary warehouse, a secondary smaller warehouse, a distributor, hospital, you know, or it goes to a wholesaler, and blah, blah, blah. By the time it gets to the patient, and if they need to return it, quite frankly, you know, there are a lot of touches to that item. And it was more of a data, you know, a volume of data problem. You know, the technology had to catch up because you were just collecting reams and reams of data, you know, because this one little bottle was bouncing all over the place. Between here 6, it could be 12, 18, 24. If it, you know, logistics gets involved, cold chain, all these types of things. So, you know, that's one of the challenges. And I kind of rolled into the additional data capture with like cold chain temperature, shock, you know, shock transport and things like that. And one of the biggest things was the lack of real-time visibility. And I think, you know, those that know about blockchain know that is a big strength of, you know, blockchain technology. And that's really what's going to drive this, is the fact that you can actually see where it is at any given moment. So I will go to the next slide here. Again, the blockchain solution that people have put forth, including us, you need an unambiguous identification tag, and they actually have companies that come out and do this for you. Governance is with smart contracts, and you manage the ancillary data. So, you know, if you get the cold, you know, if it's cold chain or things like that, you go ahead and manage it through the blockchain. And again, you're going to have real-time access to the data by all parties. So if you imagine the first, you know, on the previous slide, those entities, you know, as part of a decentralized network, everyone gets, you know, the data, the information simultaneously, so everyone can find out right where it is at any point in time. The great thing about that is instant verification and authentication. So, you know, if you think of the supply chain, somebody's at CVS pharmacy and they look at the bottle and it looks, you know, like the cap's broken or whatever, and they say, you know, so they call the, you know, the distributor where they got it from or whatever, and that person in the past has to call up the wholesaler, who calls up, you know, some other distributor, who calls up the manufacturer or the repackager. Now you just go right in and you can see, you know, you can see everything in both directions. You know, I'd like to suggest that everyone at some point, maybe later on today or tomorrow, visit our website. We have a nice section on track and trace technology. And, you know, something that we do, we have a demo, and we built a track and trace app on top of our STRATO platform, which is our blockchain engine, our blockchain platform. But you may want to see it. May be of great interest to you guys to learn about track and trace and serialization technology, where it stands today. The graphic here, typically our track and trace that we use in our demonstration has 4 entities. You know, in this case, we have regulators, distributors, manufacturers, and retailers. Think of retailers perhaps as pharmacies or something to that effect. One of the big things is, in this particular example, we are bringing regulators, i.e. the FDA or the DEA or people like that, into the network. And you'll see when we talk about clinical trials, and as the rest of my presentation goes on, you know, there's a big push to bring them in and for them to develop trust, and for the people in the network to trust the regulators in what is supposed to be a trustless system. So, but they have to build some trust together. So if you guys have time, I urge you to go to our website and check it out. So we'll talk a little bit about clinical trials right now. I think it's a subject that's of great interest to me. And one of the things is FDA regulatory oversight. And many of you, if you're in the healthcare industry, you know you have the 4 phases of the clinical trial. You have preclinical, and you know, you have the FDA review between 3 and 4. And you may know that the FDA, you know, reviews in between each of those phases and makes a decision whether you should go forward, and things like that, or what you should do. Plus, during the phases, there are FDA regulatory review things going on. And this slide was just to kind of tell you, you know, hey, take a drug to market. Look, I saw this one about $1 billion. I've seen it, you know, 400 million, 2 billion. It's all over the place. 5 to 15 years. And like I said, I mean, there's a lot of review that goes on, and it can take actually up to 6 months to complete between phases. And so we think that blockchain can actually help, shrink that time, and therefore shrink the clinical trials time, bring the drug to market sooner, and save money, time, and lives. So, I also, like Mark, I put together some use cases here. And one of the ones is to grant the FDA, like we saw in the track and trace demo, grant them regulatory access to the clinical trial data to kind of streamline the review process. At the top, you'll see under context and challenges, people that are performing, the CROs that are performing this, and they may be working with some other entity. It's not just the CRO, they outsource a lot of these things. So everybody's checking and rechecking data. It gets to be a big waste of time, and then you got to send it to the FDA, who has to check it again. So, one of the things was to actually allow them access through blockchain technology in there where they can kind of, analyze the data as they go along. And in doing this, we feel that it would actually shave quite a bit of time between the different phases, because you don't have all these, multiple reviews of the same data. And so, we're working on it. It's a use case at this point, but, there is interest, and actually the FDA likes it because they like that, blockchain is immutable. It's an immutable ledger, so you can't really get around it, because in clinical trials, not that people cheat, but it's so much money involved that people try to change the parameters of the study or things like that. The FDA likes it that they can trust the data. So it's something, it's kind of a work in progress, but we feel that this is something that would actually help shrink the time to market and help tremendously. And clinical trial components, I'll skip this at this point in the interest of time. I mean, one of our success stories is actually, there is a clinical trials management software, a CTMS software built on our platform, our STRATO platform. And originally it was built for adjudication, which is when they kind of evaluate the data that's coming from a clinical trial to see what they want to do. Is it over? Do they have enough data? Is there, should they stop or whatever? There's a lot of data, as I said, there's all these steps in that previous slide, if you saw it when it was flashing by, and you have all these third-party people, there's all this data going around. It's hard to track, and people were losing the data, and that delays things more. So, you combine this with the adjudication and all this essentially paper, and what you come up with is kind of a digital document, tracking system on a blockchain, because you had all this stuff going around. And so we actually worked with a company. I'll go to the next slide here. And actually, I'll show you a little of what the screen looks like on the next slide. I'll go ahead and get to that in a second. But I just wanted to summarize here, because it's important. For clinical trials and many other areas, blockchain solutions improve outcomes. The immutability of data, I explained, the FDA loves that. Smart contracts lock the study protocols, so people can't go in and say, oh, it's not going one way, let's tweak the study. The patient profile is created in a secure environment, so it also helps with privacy and security of the data. And again, you can track the medication and supplies in real time in a blockchain environment. So that's really great to improve chain of custody. Things get lost or they get misdirected. And that real-time tracking aspect, also allows the money to flow, in the right direction to where it belongs. So, and finally, privacy and governance components, in the future, and will allow for more patient ownership of data, which is where things are going. I mentioned earlier, we have clinical trials. This platform, this company is called ClinLogix, is one of the companies, worked with another company, Premier Logic, and they have this platform. We're particularly proud of it. So it's built on our STRATO blockchain engine. And it handles several of the steps in the clinical trials process. It's modular, and just like our STRATO platform is modular, so we continually are adding different modules to take all these third-party people you deal with and bring them into this one system. And so if anyone here would like a demo of it, you feel free to send me an email and I'll give you a call and we'll see if we can set up a time. We'll move to the next one. And so we go into a little, this slide here is kind of I think the most interesting part of the whole talk was, what's the future? The future is today. And it's things you will hear about a lot if you haven't. But, tokenization is something that's amenable to blockchain technology. So you'll see people monetizing their data. Virtual clinical trials, you hear that term, and it really has two meanings. One is direct-to-patient clinical trials. So you're holding a virtual, you're not making them go into a hospital or a clinic or a doctor's office to get their medicine or to get tested. And so people call that a virtual clinical trial. And it's really a DTP, direct-to-patient. And with the COVID, with the pandemic and things like that, people, it's obviously taken off like gangbusters, because people don't want to go to the site or whatever. And that's really what's keeping the clinical trials going. The other thing is you can allow patient data, take all their data, put it together and model a patient in a computer in silico. And I think that's really interesting. I know there's a lot of AI people, machine learning people in the audience. And so I think all that type of stuff is very, very interesting. And finally, blockchain, a robust supply chain for track and trace will help treatments like CAR T therapy, where take blood out of a patient, you genetically engineer it, and then you put it back in a patient, and it, has the antibodies to treat cancer and to destroy the cancer. So the patient is actually part of the supply chain, but you obviously have to be really careful that the blood you took out of them gets back in them after it goes through the process. So I'm going to try to wrap it up here in 2 or 3 minutes.
Hey, Craig, actually, we have a question right now. If we could
go ahead.
Go in for it, and Mark, feel free to add in your angle to this too. Rama is asking about how a system like STRATO can handle GDPR requirements to actually delete data off of a blockchain. Let's say a regulation comes out that says this data shouldn't exist anywhere anymore. I don't know if there are examples of that in the healthcare space. Is it possible to do something like that with STRATO?
And to Rama, who I actually know, I don't know the answer to that, Rama. So I can find out for you. I know I've been trying to get in touch with you for the past few days. So actually, I'll find out the answer and see if some people around here have it. Unless Mark knows what it is. Actually, go ahead, Mark.
GDPR is
complex. GDPR. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
GDPR is complex and a bit vague as well, right? And so companies are learning more about the regulation from who's getting fined and why than what the regulation is itself. And so what we've seen in financial services and a couple of other regulated industries is, we typically, there's always a decision on what data you want to put on the chain and what data you don't want to put on the chain. What we recommend for GDPR, there's a piece of GDPR that says if there's data that is necessary to operate your business, that is protected data in a sense, the way the guidelines read. So typically we'll focus on making sure that is the data on the chain because it is protected. But if there's any other data that doesn't need to be on the chain, we kind of make that decision. So it's really about what data you want to put on the chain and what you don't. So a lot of those decisions are made ahead of time. But the other thing is you've got banking firms who have customers in Europe that do require GDPR and others that don't. And so the blockchain system can again create separate private networks that have different rules. And one network is for US based and Canada that may have different rules, as well as having a different network that has rules focused on GDPR. So certainly a lot of that is covered in the design phase, and we're all learning as others are having to deal with some consequences. But it's a good question, and happy to chat more about it.
Thanks so much, Mark, and thanks, Rama, for the question. So sorry I missed the letter in there. I even have it here at the bottom of this slide, but I'm just moving forward a little. I want to keep everyone on time. I had the topic was identity management, and probably the most important thing here, and I think you guys know, in clinical trials, I mean, and when we move into the next section, the last section, medical credentialing, having these decentralized identities or having strong identity management is key. And again, the big thing is interoperability, the buzzword we always hear. With also with strengthened identity management, things like telemedicine, which we know back in March, the floodgates open there, and most of us now can, go to just see the doctor on the phone, or your phone, and be done with it. So a lot of things have benefited from it. The whole subject of decentralized identities, DID is it's pretty hefty, and there's all kind of neat things. Self-sovereign identity, where you govern. You don't need a driver's license place or a government to say who you are. You validate and authenticate yourself, and you are who you are. Monetization, as we spoke, with tokenization aspects, and getting back to Rama's question for data portability. So let's see here. I'm going to go into the next section, and this is the last section, so it should work out beautifully. Just wanted to throw it out here. It's less, it's less of a regulatory issue, but it's an example of a solution where blockchain was implemented. Medical credentialing, when you graduate, or if you have to go get a job, or you want to move to a different hospital, and this is for doctors, nurses, and other allied health people. Obviously, you have to submit all your credentials, and people have to verify that. And on this one, you see this, a bunch of circles and ovals with a bunch of lines, as you can imagine, to go through after you've been out there for a couple of years or whatever, and to get to all these insurance companies so you can get reimbursed for seeing patients. It's a lot of work. So, we feel that blockchain is a, very elegant and a very worthwhile solution. And actually, Caleb, one of our moderators, did a lot of work in this area. And so, a lot of this is his work. So I want to give him credit for that. But, again, the credentialing we talked about is a process, where you get your stuff verified. The licensing in the US is typically at the state level. And, sometimes limited mobility and opportunities. And if you think about it, these interconnected parties there would see probably a better payback than to spend time having these people either go to a website or call up. These days, you have to go check all the websites of all of these places. It's time consuming. There was a slide I took out of here that said, this is whatever. It costs a lot of money. It takes about 120 days to go through a credentialing process right now in a non-blockchain fashion. And so to keep us on time, we'll jump right into what the solution would be. And so this slide here, you look at it, it's something that we put together and said, we could build this on our platform. You have two segments of it. You have these standards-oriented blockchains, and those are the old buildings with the ivy growing on them, institutions and things like that. So they have all your transcripts and things like that, probably from earlier in your career and maybe some continuing education. And on the right-hand side, you see patient-focused blockchains. And there you have kind of the three Ps, the patient, provider, things like that. You have hospitals there, your insurer, and things like that. So what was missing was something in the middle to kind of act as a bridge between, for lack of a better, the old on one side and the young on the right side. And so this is a very simplified explanation for everyone because time constraints didn't allow me to include all the rest of it. But in the end, you created, the person that needs the credentialing will put themselves in the middle, and a digital wallet will be created. And so you can see there, flexible identity wallet. And on the next slide, and again, it's one of these, and a miracle occurs between the two boxes. But essentially, they have when they graduate or they get some type of continuing education or whatever, it's put into their wallet. Well, it's gone, it's out there, it's validated, authenticated. Once it's done, it's put in their wallet, and they can give it to anyone. So if they have to, turn it in, they want to get a job at the hospital across the street. I think everybody gets the gist of that once it's in their digital wallet and it's been authenticated, and validated, it's good. It's good. You don't have to go back and call them up. So it's really a neat system, and it's very amenable there. I mean, with the with the COVID crisis, like places like New York, they were asking for doctors. And here they waived the law, and said, we don't care, just come in. But that's not good long term. They have people coming in that, maybe shouldn't be practicing medicine or whatever. So felt that, if you had a system like this, you could just flash your phone or whatever and say, here are my credentials, and you start working right away. So,
Hey, Craig,
yes,
we're reaching the top of the hour, and I
it's
think
fine. That's
we're
the last
almost done
slide.
here. And actually, we have a question that relates to, I think, what you were talking about 2 slides ago. From Dennis, he's asking, how does STRATO actually provide this interoperability between different health exchanges? And he's specifically citing that some of them are subject to various regulatory requirements at the state level, at the federal level, and at the international level. If you could just speak to the interoperability.
I mean
there.
APIs are used in a general sense, as interpreters or to connect to our STRATO platform. But it's something that I'm working on with someone in an allied health profession, and that's very interested in this solution. And we're actually going through this process right now because you have state, entities that regulate things. In some places, you even have county entities, and you have national this or national that. So it's something that we're working through right now, but it does get rather complex, and you have to get everybody on board, because to end this kind, the beauty of blockchain is when you get everyone on a network and the data's, being shared freely, with privacy guards where it's, not supposed to be seen by other people. That's the beauty of blockchain, and that's what we're shooting for. And I think that's about it. And Dennis, he's more than welcome to talk to me, or and maybe I can elaborate or help out a little more. So thank you everyone for your patience. And are there any other questions?
Yeah, we're at the top of the hour here, and so I think maybe some people will have to go, but we're willing to stick around and answer any other questions you guys might have. Feel free to type them into the question and answer or the chat section, and we can discuss. But thank you all very much for attending this webinar on regulatory landscapes for both finance and healthcare with blockchain technology. And if you want to stick around for the nitty-gritty questions, we invite it. Thank you.
Okay, and thanks again to our moderators. Dennis, Samson, thank you so much. And to Caleb, thanks again for your help.